This is part 2 of 2 of my discussion with Dr. Joseph Weiner about motivational interviewing. Part 1 was an introduction to motivational interviewing, so definitely check that out first. And in this part, we specifically apply it to addressing vaccine hesitancy.
Welcome to the Physician's Guide to Doctoring, a practical guide for practicing physicians. Dr. Bradley Block interviews experts in and out of medicine to find out everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. The ideas expressed on this podcast are those of the interviewer and interviewee and do not represent those of their respective employers. And now, here's Dr. Bradley Block.
There are a lot of podcasts out there. Murder mysteries, breaking news. There's even a podcast about garden gnomes. Garden gnomes! But instead, you're here, learning how to be the best physician you can be. Smart move. Do you know what else is a smart move? Working a locum tenens assignment with Comp Health. Now, I know what you're thinking. You already have a job. But that's the best part. You can work flexible locum assignments on the side for extra income. Or you can work locums full-time too. And to top it all off, locums almost always pays more on average. Just head to financialresidency.com/comphealth and see what locums can do for you financially. Motivational interviewing has preceded the existence of SARS-CoV-2 and has been used in the parents of newborns, and it's shown to be very effective. And so now we want to pivot and use it in adults who are vaccine hesitant in the same way. So how do we start that conversation? A lot of us, and I encourage all of our listeners to do that, we should be asking all of our patients about it, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're in for an ear infection. I'm still going to ask you if you plan to get the vaccine. You're in for a sinus infection. You've got maybe not a neck mask because then we're worried about cancer. Stay on topic. But for something where it's really not a potentially grave illness, I'm going to be bringing it up. And so I think all of us should be doing it. How do we do it?
Yeah, there are two ways to do it. Either a patient will raise it to you, what are your thoughts about these COVID vaccines? Or a patient raised it to me over the weekend, I have mixed feelings about getting this COVID vaccine. Or you could raise it to the patient, given that there is the availability for COVID vaccines, I am checking in with all my patients to see what their thoughts are about that. And all of those are very natural ways to pivot into the discussion.
But open-ended. What are your thoughts? Not, do you plan to get it? What are your thoughts?
What are your thoughts about it? Right. And that's an example of ORS, right? An open-ended question, because depending on their thoughts, they're going to guide where this discussion will go. If you say, are you planning to get it? And they say no, well, what are you going to say about that? Well, like you could say, well, how come? Already it's a little bit of a adversarial engagement. If you start with, well, what are your thoughts about that? The patient can say, I don't want to be a guinea pig. And you could say, well, I'd like to hear more about that. So if one
is that, that sounds so, I'd like to hear, I would have trouble making that roll off my tongue. I'd like to hear more about that. To me, it sounds a little scripted,
How would you say it then? What would work?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't have a better answer,
go ahead, Brett.
So what are your thoughts on the vaccine or on the vaccines? And then they say, well, I think it came out too quickly.
And I might say, well, some people feel that way. What leads you to that belief? And they may tell me, and then I might say, well, what have some patients said to you, Brett? So do you want to dialogue this a little bit? Yeah, that would be good, right?
Yeah.
All right.
So I'm not so sure. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, since COVID vaccines are out now, I check in with all my patients and just to see what their thoughts are. So I wonder what your thoughts are about getting a vaccine.
I'm not so sure. I just think it came out too quickly.
And so what I'm hearing is that you want to make sure that any vaccine you get is safe.
Yeah, it just seems like every other vaccine took a long time to develop, and this one just came out so quickly. There has to be some reason why this one came out faster than the rest of them, and I don't think I trust it.
Yeah, you're concerned that it was rushed. Yeah. And have you read anything about what led to the ability to make this vaccine so quickly?
No, I just saw, I just can't believe that it just makes me suspicious that it came out so fast.
It has been developed so quickly. You're absolutely right. A lot faster than the vast majority of other vaccines have been produced. And that is hard to take in. May I share with you the reasons why we have been able to make this vaccine so quickly? And I would go ahead and I would explain that in a way that's syntonic with health literacy and cultural beliefs and language and all of those other things that are important in medical education, educating our patients. So I did a few things there. Could we go over that and see how I began that discussion?
Please. It just, to me, having gone from taking apps off my phone to a potentially life-saving vaccine or a life-saving vaccine, the conversation regarding the apps on my phone just seems was so much longer than our very brief conversation about the vaccine. Like it seems like we just went, our conversation was similar to other conversations I've had with my patients. I don't know. I find it so unlikely that I got it right.
Oh, wow.
You
Well,
know?
you may have, who knows, because you're super smart. And
Well,
I
thank
will
you.
tell everybody Brad is super smart. Plus, Brad sent me the questions he was going to ask me today, and he did an amazing job putting together really sophisticated questions. So you may have gotten it right. And based on our discussion, you are very thoughtful and empathetic. So I think that's important to say because there's a lot of stuff if you have the spirit you kind of can get a lot of motivational interviewing. What I would say is, well, our discussion about vaccination didn't end with me educating you because you still may have a lot of hesitancy. So I might explain to you, well, this is how they made it so quickly. We talk about how it's easier to make RNA vaccines and that this was built on 10 years of research and we were all waiting for ready, set, go. And, it was in production and they were, while they were testing the vaccine, they were producing vaccines and the government made an investment in buying vaccine. We go through all of those things. And then at the end, I might say to you and be one of your patients again. So what are your thoughts about how we were able to make this vaccine so quickly?
Well, and this is where I get stuck. I still don't know.
Uh-huh.
Like, I feel like I'm right there with them. And then I don't know. I still don't know.
Well, tell me what your hesitancy is. Tell me more.
I still feel like I can't trust it. I just want to wait. I just
Yeah.
want to wait.
Okay, you want to wait. And what would you want to wait to see?
I just want other people to get it first. I don't want to be the guinea pig.
Yeah. And so you don't want something bad to happen to you. You value your health. And so on one hand, I know you don't want to get COVID. Actually, I would say it the other way. I apologize. On one hand, you don't want to have a bad side effect from this vaccine. On the other hand, you don't want to get COVID. So you have a bit of a dilemma, it sounds like.
Yeah, I don't know what this vaccine would do to my body 2 or 5 years from now. They don't know, and they're not going to know until 5 years from now. I don't want to end up on some, like that commercial I see about mesothelioma. Those people got exposed to it. Now they're part of a class action lawsuit.
Yes. And so for some kinds of medicines, stuff comes out after 2 or 3 or 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so now, what did I just do? I emphasize what's called sustained talk. You want to do that as little as possible, but we have not established enough of a connection yet for me to continue to pursue change talk, in my opinion. There might be, Dr. Rolnick may say, Joe, you just blew it there. You shouldn't have gone in that direction. But I'm making a clinical decision to really legitimize your concerns because they're legitimate concerns. What's going to happen 5 years from now? You're going to get Coochie disease from, getting this vaccine. So I would say, yeah, well, a lot of people are concerned about it. And would it be okay if we talk about the pros and cons of the dilemma that you're in?
Yeah, please.
And so that dilemma that I emphasize, that's another kind of reflective statement. On one hand, and I say the sustained talk, you don't want to have a side effect from this vaccine. On the other hand, you don't want to get COVID. And so I'm going to start with the reasons why you don't want to get the vaccine. And then I'm going to end with the reasons why you may want to get the vaccine. Because if you end on the positive, it's more likely that somebody will take that as they think things through, the positive aspects of it.
Now, you also asked my permission to continue talking about it. I could see a scenario where the patient says, you know what, I just don't want to, I'm just not going to get it.
Yeah.
And they just shut it down.
Yeah. And so that goes to the acceptance part of the spirit of MI. And you have to decide how you're going to approach that. You may approach it simply by saying, this sounds like not the right time for you to discuss this. And you might say, yeah, really, I just don't want to get into it. I'm not in the mood. Everybody's bugging me to get this vaccine. And you might say, well, I respect that. You'll be the decision maker. Or you might say, yeah, I respect that. You'll be the decision maker. We don't have to talk about it. If you wish, we could talk about what everybody's telling you that's bugging you. We could decide to take it one step further and assess, am I going to piss this person off more than it's worth? Or do we want to hang it? And it's tough because you get COVID. Not only do you have a small % chance of dying, but then there are also the morbidities that can be chronic and really mess up somebody's life. And so you have to decide as the clinician how far you're going to push this. And where this leads in motivational interviewing is, as clinicians, the majority of us, not all of us, believe it's good to get the vaccine. There are some doctors that believe I'm going to wait, right? Exactly. So it's not like smoking and lung cancer. There are some of our colleagues that are saying, I'm going to wait. And so it's really, you may feel that it's good to get the vaccine, but the acceptance of where the patient is at, and that leads to the question, I'm very interested. I'd like to hear what your reluctance is. And that gets to, if you want to use stages of change, pre-contemplation, you and I have a different point of view. What's your point of view? I really want to know that. And so that's also an example of engaging or connecting with the patient. So let's say, as you're saying, no, I've had enough. I don't want to talk about it. You make that decision. But let's say I say to you, I'd like to hear more about your distrust, given the science of what we discussed, and you're concerned that in 2 or 3 or 5 years, you may have a bad effect. What have you heard about? What have you read? What are your thoughts? What might happen down the road?
I don't know the answer because I haven't taken anyone down this road. So I'm not sure what the answer might be. I don't know whether they're going to get. I think the answer is going to be around the unknown, right?
Yeah.
I just don't know what it could do. Don't know what it could do, and I don't know how anyone could know because it hasn't been around for that long.
Yeah, and so then what I would do is the following. Okay, what the scientists say is when this little thing, this message that we inject into your arm, it gets taken up by the cells. It tells your cells, make this little part of the virus, not the whole virus, this little part. So the body now is on guard. And if the virus gets into your system, bam, we're going to attack it. But after that little message gets into your cell, the cell breaks it down. It's not there anymore. It's gone. And there's nothing, it has nothing to do with the body anymore. Now, I think in the back of my mind, could somebody have an autoimmune reaction 5 years from now, 10 years? I don't know. I'm not an immunologist. The immunologists that are listening, are going to call up and say, what did you have the psychiatrist on for? Because he doesn't know any immunology. And so I really don't know the answer. I wouldn't know how to respond to that. I would just simply say it's broken down by the body. And what scientists think is that there are clearly, we do know the short-term effects, what will happen 5 years from now. We do know the effects of having COVID, and we do know the short-term effects of the virus. Could we talk about that, what we do know? And so I would shift it from what we don't know and say, this is what we think now. We could only tell you what we think, and then what we do know. And then I would say to the patient, would you like to hear what we do know about the short-term effects? And I would take them through that, and I would be happy to say of the millions of people, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, and all the immunologists will call in, never have a psychiatrist on it, that of the millions of people who have been vaccinated, not one person has died from COVID. That's my understanding. And not one of the millions who have been isn't that unbelievable? And I would say, you're worried about an unknown 5 years, potential side effect. That's taking a risk. And then we think about the risk of not getting infected. We've had 460,000 or more people in the United States that have died. And then I go through the long-term implications. Without lecturing, I would keep asking, may I share with you this? May I share with you that? And then I would say, well, and may I share with you what the side effects that we do know are? And I would say, you have a valid point of view, that some people don't want to risk having these unknown side effects that may or may not happen in 5 years. And so that's on one hand. On the other hand, this is what we do know. And so how do you, given that you value your health, how are you taking that in? Like, given that you want to focus on your kids, how are you taking that in? It's the same thing over and over.
You want to stay safe. You want to stay safe. The vaccine makes you nervous because you're not sure if you will remain safe by getting the vaccine. But now that I told you that not getting the vaccine could make you less safe because of what we talked about with the virus, what are your is that a reasonable way to put it?
Exactly. You're trying to help them sort through their dilemma.
Yeah.
So people, we could, in terms of complex decisions, complicated decisions, we could assume that the person standing in front of you is ambivalent, that they will have mixed feelings. Now, it used to be that there would be a lot in motivational interviewing, that a lot of effort would have been taken to evoke both sides of the ambivalence. And what has been found is that if you spend too much time evoking the sustained talk, meaning I don't want to, I shouldn't, I won't, all that, it kind of, people dig in their heels. If you devote more time evoking the change talk, there'll be more flexibility. And so where you need to establish a relationship with someone, you do need to acknowledge their point of view. And so that's acknowledging the sustained talk. I don't want to be a guinea pig. But we then spent a lot of time talking about the other side of your ambivalence, not my ambivalence. This is the ambivalence that you presented as the hypothetical patient.
As the patient. So the CDC recommends that we use specific language when we're talking about the vaccine. And they say this on their website specifically. Quote, I strongly recommend, right?
Yeah.
I haven't heard you say that.
That's correct. Yet. You haven't heard me say it yet.
Yet. So where does that, because that to me sounds more paternal. It sounds more authoritarian. It sounds like we've made the decision and taken it away from the patient by, I strongly recommend that you get this. Whereas, we started the conversation with, what are your thoughts?
Exactly.
So does that language, I strongly recommend, play or not? Because you said yet, which makes me think that it does.
It can
play a role. Where do we weave that in?
Yeah, so thank you. It's a great question.
And sorry, that just to include this all in the same thought, they also state that we should assume they are getting vaccinated when we bring it up, which is not. That seems in contrast to what you said. These two things that they're recommending, are we going to be agreeing with them by the end of this conversation?
Yeah. Well, these are terrific. I could just give it my best shot and answer both questions. So let's see, question number one. I would not start a discussion saying, well, we have the COVID vaccine, and so I want to talk to you about setting up an appointment. That doesn't make any sense based on everything we just said, because the patient's going to react in one of several ways. And we didn't articulate this fully when we talked about psychological reactants. You'll see one of several reactions. One patient may not say anything and nod and not show up for the COVID vaccine appointment. So they'll just nod. A second patient may start to push back. Whoa, wait a second, I'm not getting a vaccine. A third patient may just, they just may withdraw and think, I'm not coming back to this doctor again, right? And then a fourth patient, well, may agree with you, but on, less likely than the others. So there are the common reactions to the parental approach. And so it doesn't make sense to start off a discussion like that. However, let's say we have this whole long discussion and I'm educating you about the messenger RNA and how it works and bada bing, bada boom, all of that. We get to the end and you say, well, I'm still not really hot about getting this vaccine. You may say, may I give you my recommendation and what I've done myself? So you could ask permission to give a recommendation. And when you get permission to give a recommendation, the person is exercising their autonomy by allowing you to give your recommendation. If the person says, no, I really don't want to hear your recommendation, what is the likelihood that if you give your recommendation, they're going to say, well, now that you mention it, I will get vaccinated. And so we're being practical in how motivational interviewing evolved to begin with. Like one could say, I strongly recommend, but under what circumstances? And I'll actually read you an email a patient sent to me just today. She was, to use this vernacular, contemplative and terrified about getting the COVID vaccine. We had a motivational interviewing discussion. And where was I going with this? I distracted myself with this email I'm about to read.
And it's okay that you isn't, it's patient's permission.
Yeah. Thank you. Got it. Thank you, Brad. At least between the two of us, you'll remind me what I was going to say. And so I said, well, may I share my point of view about it? May I share my recommendation? She said, sure. I said, if there's a vaccine available, I would jump on it. I don't speak like I would strongly recommend it, like strong, I'm going to pump my biceps, I'll be right back, I'm going to do some push-up. I speak in a language that my patient, I would jump on it. And I speak it from my heart, right? I would jump on it. And may I share why? And I would try to integrate it into their medical history and their life circumstances. And they may say, well, why? And I might say, you're taking care of your mom, and you're putting yourself at risk to get COVID and get her sick. I would try to personalize the recommendation. Or, you've had kidney disease for a while, you're on dialysis and you'd be at greater risk. I'm just sharing with you my thoughts as your doctor who cares about you when we are thinking about the dilemma you're in. And I would go back to the dilemma. On one hand, you don't want a bad thing to happen with the vaccine. On the other hand, you really want to take good care of your health. So I'd frame it that way. Would I assume everyone's going to get vaccinated? No, because not everybody is going to get vaccinated. Let's get real.
And let's say we're not a physician that's offering the vaccine, right? We're still in this place where not that many people have access to it, not that many people qualify for it, and physicians aren't, it's not like it's a doctor's office right now. How do we wrap up the conversation with an action, right? Because this is where we try to take it. We end it, you said, end it on the positive, right? Like you're not going to end it with reasons they wouldn't get the vaccine. You're going to end it with reasons they should get the vaccine. And then you want to, and correct me if I'm wrong, you want to end it with an action step, with something that they're going to do. So if it's not their turn to get the vaccine, what's the action? What can we have them do?
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. Well, I would say two things connected to that question. Thing number one would be, let's say they're not ready to get the vaccine, even if it was available. I would say, well, may I share with you a way, if you become ready to get a vaccine, how you could check and how you could get one? Like, here's a resource for you to see who offers the vaccine and when you would become available, when it would
Right. So
become
like the New
available.
York State Department of Health guide, website
Yeah,
for who
exactly.
qualifies. Check this
Exactly.
regularly, and this is where you'll see where you can get and when you qualify.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So if they're not ready, I'm giving that resource. And I would also say, would it be okay the next time you see me, and I might schedule like, well, I'd really like to see this person in a month and see if I could continue to talk with them about greater acceptance of, since we met last, have you given this any thought? And see if they were open to seeing me again in a month. Would be okay if you came back and we talked about it again in a month? And some people would say no, not really. Some people would say yes, but at least you're keeping your foot in the door. And then for the people that are ready, yeah, I'd give that New York State website. I'd give them a resource. I might explain, the different levels of groups 1 through 4 and where they might likely fit in. And if there's any, now I would imagine people from all over the country and maybe even other countries listening to this podcast. So whatever resource is available in your locality, I would certainly provide to your patient.
Yes, we happen to live about 20 minutes from each other, so they might not all have the Nassau County Department of Health website as the place for them to go to. Yes, there are international listeners to this podcast. So yeah. To the international listeners and the local listeners, any parting tips for either motivational interviewing in general or motivational interviewing specifically for vaccine acceptance?
For motivational interviewing in general, I would suggest that you read Miller and Rolnick's book called Motivational Interviewing if you want to learn more about it. Or you could go on the MINT website. Let me get the URL for you. Maybe mint.org, but let's see. No, it's not that. It'll take you to some spam. MINT stands for Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers. So now Mint Budget Tracker and Planner, motivational interviewing.
I think it's motivationalinterviewing.org.
Oh, there you go. That makes sense.
Motivationalinterviewing.org.
And so you could go on that, and they'll have some resources where you could learn more about motivational interviewing. Or you can Google motivational interviewing. You'll see a lot of videos. Steve Rolnick and Bill Miller have some really good YouTube videos where you could see them demonstrate the skills of motivational interviewing.
Fantastic. Dr. Joseph Weiner, thank you so much for taking all this time to teach us about motivational interviewing for vaccine acceptance. And we could go on for hours like this. I could listen to this. I could have these conversations with you for hours, because this is really at the heart of the premise of the podcast is everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle, because this was not taught when I was in medical school, but you are now teaching this.
Yeah.
Is it to residents or to medical students that you're teaching this?
To medical students.
So it's being taught in medical. So that's, it's really fantastic. It's going to improve the dialogue of all of the subsequent conversation of all the subsequent practitioners that come out with the knowledge that this is out there.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I didn't learn it in medical school either. So we all learn as we go along. And it's super gratifying to come on here. I really am honored by the opportunity, Brad.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks a bunch. Have a great evening, everyone.
Welcome to the Physician's Guide to Doctoring, a practical guide for practicing physicians. Dr. Bradley Block interviews experts in and out of medicine to find out everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. The ideas expressed on this podcast are those of the interviewer and interviewee, and do not represent those of their respective employers. And now, here's Dr. Bradley Block.